just give kind of 4 disclaimers at the start of this. And the number one is, we are not fishing for a bigger offering here. That is not what we're trying to do. Number 2 is, I don't want anyone to walk out this room feeling guilty, like, oh, I'm such a bad person because I have to pay my bills, because I have to have money. Number 3, I don't want anyone walking out this room thinking, if I were poor, then I would be holier. That if I look at Christians in the developing world or Christians who struggle with money, they must be holier than me because they have less money. That's not the case at all. And finally, I don't want us going out here sort of feeling we need to litigate every purchase we make, feeling we need to be forensic about every penny we spend, and that God is somehow looking at us with a magnifying glass, looking at our bank account and saying, yes, no, holy, unholy. Not at all. What I want to speak about today is that money just really, really matters. And I used this analogy before, but I'm going to use it again because I love gladiators. And there's a great kind of event they do in gladiators where they have a wall in between the contestant and the gladiator. And the whole thing, you just have to push the other person with the wall off the platform. But what happens is, to make it easier for the contestant, after about 20 seconds of pushing or 10 seconds of pushing, they tip the platform so that the gladiator is pushing uphill, and they always lose when they're pushing uphill because it's impossible to push uphill. And what I want to say is that the reason we want to spend today, Wednesday and Sunday speaking about money is that money is the gravitational pull of so many of our lives. And what I want to say is that if our money is drawing us towards God, it will draw us in a really powerful way. And if our money is drawing us away from God, it will be a hugely powerful draw away from God and his purposes and what he wants to do in our lives. And again, I want to stress this so much. This is not about we need to bump the offering up at all. This is about speaking to myself and speaking to everyone here that money can have such a grip on our hearts and can keep us so easily from the things that God wants to do in us. And we need to break free today. I've done money, I've done break free. We'll get more song references as best as we can. And so I'm going to be speaking mainly from Luke 12, which is a parable that Jesus tells about a man who wanted to build bigger barns for his grain. We're going to have a little bit of Luke 16, which is a really odd, strange parable Jesus tells about why it's a good thing to be a shrewd manager who cheats his boss out of money. That's an odd one. And a little bit of 1 Timothy 6, where Paul speaks to his kind of protege about money and about how to speak to those people. And it's funny that we've been doing unsung heroes in the Bible and people who only get one line in the whole Bible, because at the start of this parable, the reason Jesus tells this parable in Luke 12 is because of a man who only got one line in the entire Bible. So I'm going to be reading from Luke 12, verse 13. And Jesus is just doing a whole bunch of teaching, and it says, someone in the crowd shouted, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." So there's these 2 brothers, and one of them's taken all the money after the parents have died. And he says, teacher, tell my brother, give me half the inheritance. I'm a sibling as well. And that's the one line this man gets in the whole Bible. And then Jesus uses this as an object lesson to basically say, you're bad, essentially. You're obsessed with money. So I'll read on. Jesus says, "Man, who made me a judge over you?" And then he said to them, "Take care and be on your guard against covetousness, because your life doesn't consist in the abundance of your possessions." And so we go to this next slide. He tells them a parable. And in the parable, a rich man, it says, he has his fields produce plentifully. Back one. God doesn't interrupt yet. You've interrupted too soon. You're not God. But yeah, a rich man, his fields produce plentifully, and he says, I've got all this extra grain. What am I going to do? I can't fit them in my barns. And so he tears the barns down, and he builds bigger barns, and he puts all his grain in there. And then he says to himself, this is great. I'm going to relax. I'm going to take it easy. My life is going to be good. And I want to make the point here that who is this parable speaking to? Well, the parable is about a rich man who came into unexpected wealth. He was already well off, And he came into this kind of unexpected and unnecessary wealth that he didn't need. And what I want to say here is that this is not speaking to people on the breadline. This is not speaking to people who are having to decide between, feeding their kids or buying school uniform and eating well. This is not a parable speaking to people in poverty. This is a parable speaking to people in relative comfort. And I think it's apt for us, I'm speaking to myself here as well, but many of us in this church live in relative comfort. We have enough money. We have food, we have mortgages, we have clothes, we can pay for most things, we go on holidays. Again, we're not speaking of everyone here, but the majority of us, I feel, in this church have enough money. And actually there's a parable about, well, what if I have enough and more comes in? What if I have enough money and then I find I have more? What am I to do with it? What's my attitude to that? So it's not about people living on the breadline here. And then God interrupts. He's just about saying to himself, oh great, I'm going to live well, I'm going to have more, I'm going to have a comfortable life. And then in verse 20, God just interrupts and says, you're a fool. This very night, your soul is required of you. And the things you've prepared, whose are they going to be? You're not going to see that grain. You're not going to see that bread. And then Jesus says, this is how it will be for anyone who stores up treasure for themselves and is not rich towards God. So this is a parable which is speaking at first to those who are in comfort, who have enough. But he's using this extreme analogy of a wealthy man who gets loads more money and builds massive barns. But then he does kind of try and bring it down to the everyday person. He says, actually, this is true of anyone who stores up wealth for themselves and is not rich towards God. And I want to make the point here that actually, and I've said this before, that Jesus doesn't morally kind of browbeat this guy in the parable. Jesus doesn't say, what a selfish guy. Jesus doesn't say, oh, what a godless guy. He actually calls him a fool. He's like, you're just not logical. You're not thinking straight. Because actually, the point Jesus is going to make, and the point that Paul makes, is that there is treasure of infinitely more value that this man could have had. In fact, he was so focused on the here and now, he was so focused on how am I going to have a nice life right now, that he missed out on treasure of infinite value. And Jesus isn't here saying this is a bad person. He's actually saying this guy made a poor investment. This guy went to the eternal bank and didn't make an investment. Instead, he kind of blew it all on sweeties that he couldn't even enjoy. And so Jesus is saying to us today, not you need to be a better person or you need to be this or that, but actually you can make an investment of infinite value. And he's given us an opportunity, not just when the offering bag comes around, but every moment of every day to make an investment of infinite value. And you may have heard Jesus says, he says that instead of hoarding money now, we should give money away. Why? Not so that everyone can have a nice life who's got less money than us. No. He says because then you're storing up treasure in heaven. You're storing up wealth. You're storing up treasure. You're storing up things, as I said, of infinitely more value. And so I want to do a few things today. I want to talk about today, why did this man want to build bigger barns? And why is it that some of us, metaphorically, have that temptation to build bigger barns? What is it in our heart that makes us want to focus on the here and now, that makes us want to focus on building up what he says is treasure for ourselves? So I want to talk about why we do that, and I want to go on also to speak about the real cost of wealth and the real cost of money, and then we're going to end by looking at what Jesus' solution is for that. And so I just want to zero in on one verse here. And when I was first reading this passage, this verse it genuinely blew me away. I have read the Bible a few times, and you get these classic passages that you may have read 3 or 4 or more times, but there was something in here that just blew me away. It genuinely, I'd never seen it before. And it's in verse 19. The man says, I'm going to tear down my barns, I'm going to build bigger barns. And in verse 19, he says, and I will say to my soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry. And actually, I want to speak about when money speaks to your soul. Because we speak sometimes at church about, we've got to speak to our souls. We've got to almost like tell ourselves, no, God is good even if I don't feel it. When I look at circumstances around me, I've got to speak to my soul and say, no, soul, you're not going to command me. I know that God is good except da-da-da. And actually, money can speak to our soul as well. And money and wealth, it whispers promises to our soul that we find so much to be untrue. And so why did this man build bigger barns? Well, there were 3 promises that money made to his soul. There are 3 things that were whispered into his ear that caused him to make this foolish decision, that drew him, that gravitational pull of money that threw him into the wrong place. And the first one, that money said to him, you don't need to worry. Money said, I can take away your anxiety. He says here to his soul, I have ample goods laid up for many years. And I think so many of us, there's an anxiety in us. What's going to happen next year? What's going to happen when my contract runs out? How am I going to pay my mortgage? How am I going to afford a down payment for a mortgage? How am I going to pay for my kids to do this or that? Or when this happens? Or what if my car breaks down? And there's in a lot of us, there's an anxiety that we feel that money can solve. And we have these worries about the future, and we have these anxieties about what might happen or what could happen. And money, it whispers to us, it says to us, you can have goods laid up for many years. You won't need to worry about the future. And the second thing money says is you can take it easy. He says to his soul, relax, eat, and drink. And money tells us that we can take it easy. Money tells us that we wouldn't have to work as hard, that we wouldn't have to do as much, that we wouldn't have to, strain and take responsibility and work and wouldn't have to make so much effort. If I had money, well, then I could just relax. If I had money, well, then I wouldn't have these problems. And finally, money tells us that our pain will go away. He says, I'm going to say to my soul, be merry, that money will give me joy. That maybe there's a lack in us, maybe there's a sadness, maybe there's a depression that we said, if only I had enough money, then that would go away. If only I had enough money, I wouldn't be anxious. If only I had enough money, I could finally relax. I could finally be happy. If only I had enough money, then fill in the gap yourself. And I want to tell you today that these are lies that money tells us. And I don't want to be stupid. I don't want to, be silly. Of course, if you have debts, money can pay your debts. Of course, if you lack food, money can pay for food. But when we get to this place of comfort, we're yearning for more. And we say, money will take away the bad things in my life. Money will solve the problems I have in my life. And I promise you, because it says in the Bible, money will not do that. Money might give you an easier life. Money might take away some of the worries you have. Money might allow you to relax and give you a sense of happiness, but it will never solve the problems that our soul has. And money will promise things to our soul that it cannot give us. And I want to just drop a little one in here. If you go to the next slide, I've got one of my favorite characters in the world here. This is Mr. Krabs. And again, sorry, another millennial references. But I think many of us don't think that we're like Mr. Krabs. This is his little catchphrase. Hello, I like money. This is Mr. Krabs. And we think, well, that's not me. I don't like money. I don't love money. I just need to pay my bills. I just need to, do this and that. And we think, I'm not like Mr. Krabs. And we read 1 Timothy 6:9. It says, but those who desire to be rich fall into temptation. And we think, that's not me. I don't want to be rich. I just need to have a little bit more than I have right now. I just need to have enough. And we think of Luke 16. It says the Pharisees who loved money, they ridiculed Jesus. And we might think, I don't love money. Who loves money? But I spoke about this before. It's not money that people love. It's what money can access is what we love. We're not like Mr. Krabs just saying, I want to, have bundles and bundles of cash underneath my pillowcase that will make me happy. No, it's what is it that I really want that I feel money can provide? And what is it? It's money can make me safe. Money can give me peace. Money can take away my worries. Money can take away my stresses. Money can make my problems go away. And it's not that we love money, but it's that we worry about those things. We think money will take it away. And I want to let you in on a little bit of how my brain works, because I used to have this fantasy. I still have it sometimes. So, like a daydream. You're like, you're just sitting at work and you think, I wish I could be anywhere else. And my daydream used to be, I could just publish a book. It would make $1 million, and I'd never have to work again. And every now and again, God help me, not as much as it used to be. Every now and again, that same fantasy goes through my mind. I'll be in the school library, and I'll pick up a book, and I'm like, this is trash. I could have written this in my sleep. This person's probably a millionaire. And I think, I could write a book. I'd never have to work. I'd never have to get up at 7 a.m. again. I'd never have to do this again and that again. And actually, I don't think of myself as those who desire to be rich. I don't think, I want to be a millionaire. But you know what? What is riches promised me, that fantasy is about, I'll never have to work again. I'll just be comfortable and life will be easy. And actually, suddenly, I'm falling into that category of those who desire to be rich. I'm falling into that category of those people who want to store up wealth for themselves and not be rich towards God. And so I want to try, I'm not pointing the finger today, but I want you to ask yourself, do you desire to be rich? And you might say no, but actually ask yourself, what is it that your daydream about? What is it that your little fantasy is about? And is it, I won't have any worries, I won't have any problems, I won't have any stresses because there's money in the bank? And actually for me, I know that can be true a lot of the time. And I think it maybe is for a lot of the people in this room as well. That we are a little bit like Mr. Krabs sometimes. And so it says here, those who desire to be rich fall into temptation. And I want to talk about the real cost of money, what it can cost us to have money. So if you go to number 7, the 3 things here is, first is that money will fail you. The second, that money will master you. And the third, that ultimately the Bible says money will destroy you. And this is not for us to be afraid of money, because it's the love of money. It's the attraction of money. It's the false promises of money that will fail us, master us, and destroy us. In this parable in Luke 16, Jesus talks about this parable and he says, when money fails, you should have used it better. And don't we all know, Chris was talking about just what he's been going through in the last few weeks. And so many of us know that the rich and the poor alike, they suffer with just life, don't we? There's nothing that can insulate you from the darkness in this world. There's no amount of millions in your bank account that can stop the hurt of bereavement, or that can stop the hurt of loss or loneliness. And actually, so much of the time, we think, if I were richer, I'd be insulated from life's problems. But it's just not true. That, in this room in the world, we're in probably the top 1 or 5% richest people in the world, and yet we suffer the same problems, the same darkness, the same horrors sometimes in this world that other people suffer in the developing world. And actually there's no amount of money that can keep us from the worst things in life. And money will ultimately fail us, and we'll need something to help us. And money will also master us. Really famous verse in the Bible, Jesus says, you cannot serve both God and money. You must hate one and love the other. And actually this idea that money will start out as something that we use as a tool, but it will begin to master us. And I shared that analogy a few weeks ago about this woman at my dad's work who basically, she was offered that promotion and she said, I don't want to take it. And that they bumped the money and she said, I'll take it. And it cost her everything. It ended up mastering her. And I see this so often in people, especially in this world today, and I see it in my own heart sometimes, this addiction to work, this sense of like, I'm going to put everything behind my job. I'm going to put everything behind climbing up the corporate ladder. I'm going to put everything behind making sure I do really well at work, that I take a top position, that I get money. And it's not because people love money. It's not because they're going into work, clicking their crab fingers saying, I like money. It's because they're worried about the future. It's because they're worried about providing for their children. It's because they're worried about this. And actually, God says money has maybe mastered something in you. If that's you, if you find yourself putting your work ahead of your family, if you find yourself putting your work ahead of your devotion to God, if you find yourself putting your work ahead of your own health, maybe there's something there that has mastered you. Maybe there's something there that you've fallen into a temptation that Timothy talks about here. That actually there's a mastery of your soul that is coming. And it's not like one or the other. There's this kind of liminal stage. There's this point where, am I committed to God? Am I committed to my family? Or am I committed to money in the bank? Am I believing those lies that I am being whispered to by money? Because money can master us very, very easily. And ultimately it says here that money will destroy you. In 1 Timothy 6, it says many people there, it says he says to warn the rich that they can fall into a temptation. They can be caught in a trap of harmful desires which pull them down to ruin and destruction. And we need to take these warnings seriously, because we can think, oh, it just means the people who've got 10 million in the bank. It just means the people. But actually, it's speaking to many of us. It warns us that money is that gravitational pull. And if we pour it out towards God, it can draw us towards him. But if we store it up in our hearts and our bank accounts, it will just draw us away from God. That it is a powerful force to draw us to ruin and even to temptation. And so I want to speak now about warnings and warm words, because actually when Jesus speaks to those people who are having this struggle, people like us who we know that money is important, but it can have that hold in our lives, he gives warnings, but he gives warm words as well. And I've got a little sign there, because one of the most terrifying things that happened to us probably about 3 months ago, we went to McDonald's. That was actually the good part. And we were just coming out of Barkingside McDonald's, and we were halfway across the road in the little traffic island bit. And for some reason, Remy I don't know if it was like the sugar from the McDonald's or the excitement or the bright lights, he just charged out into the road, like in front of a bus. And me and Sonia, I can't remember what happened. Did we grab him? Did we chase him? I think we just grabbed him and like yanked him back like crazy, like probably dislocated his arm or something. And I remember we crossed the road and we were just like shaken up, and we were like, I don't know if you've got kids or if you've ever been in a situation like you kind of want to shout at them, you kind of want to hug them, you're kind of really worried yourself. And actually there was something in that moment where I was like, this kid needs a warning. He needs to know that was the most dangerous thing they could have done in that moment. And I was like, Remy, never do that again. That was so dangerous. And then he was crying and he was weeping, and I was like, oh, maybe I should give him a hug. And it was a lot, man. It's probably more stressful for me than him, to be honest. He's probably forgotten all about it. But he needed a warning. He needed a firm warning because he was in a lot of danger, but he also needed some warm words. He needed me to say, I'll keep you safe, don't worry about it. And I didn't do that, sadly. He only got the warning. He gets warm words most of the time. But there's something here that I think there's something precious about the God we serve, that he understands, he sympathizes with us. He sympathizes with us that it is difficult. The very next line, straight after he says, fool, your life is going to be taken from you tonight, and you've wasted that money. What's the very next line? He says, so do not be anxious. And actually, I think Jesus knows why we're so tempted to money. Jesus isn't here to berate us. He's here to warn us. He's here to warn us with a severe warning that money can control our lives, money can master us, and money can lead us to destruction. But he's doing it in a way that's warm. He understands the temptation. He understands the anxieties. He understands the troubles we have. So, first of all, the warnings that Jesus tells. In Luke 12, he says, watch out, take care. In 1 Timothy 6, Paul says, flee the desire to be rich. And again, we can emphasize that so much. He doesn't just say, be careful about it. He says, flee it. He's like, run away. He's like, if you see the desire to be rich in your heart, he says, run away. Like, get as far away from that as possible. And then again in Luke 13, he says, you cannot serve God and money. It's a statement of fact. It's like you can't have a little bit. You can't be in and out. He's like, you just cannot serve God and money. And if we see this in our hearts, if we see this attraction, if we see this desire to use money to solve the problems we have, or to fantasize about what money can do with us or for us, Jesus says, watch out, take care, flee those things. But he has these warm words for us as well. And I want to go to this slide here. The warm words he says to us. He says in chapter 12, verse 22, he says, don't be anxious. And we can read that as like a command, like, don't be anxious. Like, oh, I'm really anxious. Don't be anxious. Okay, you fixed me. Well done. Like, it's not like that, But Jesus says, don't be anxious. Why? He says, because consider the flowers. And, you might know this bit, but he says, if you're worried about money, if you're worried about what's going to happen in the future, if you're worried about how you're going to provide for your children, if you're worried about how you're going to afford a down payment or a mortgage or any of those things, he says, look at the flowers. He says, do they strive? Do they worry? But God clothes them. And he says, look at the birds. Are they worried about what they're going to eat? And yet God feeds them. And there's something here about God's imminent closeness to us and to our worries. That he looks at us and he says, I will feed you, I will clothe you, I will provide for you. And if we want to solve that money mastery in our heart, if we want to become people who can be generous and can be rich toward God, actually the answer is faith. The answer is to say, I'm going to trust that God will clothe me. I'm going to trust that God will feed me. And at the very end, in chapter 12, verse 32, he says, fear not, little flock. Fear not, little flock, because it's your Father's pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions, give to the needy, provide yourselves with money that will never grow old, with treasure in heavens that will not fail, where no thief approaches and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And there's something, again, just so amazing about God, Jesus' words to me. He says, fear not, little flock. It is your Father's pleasure to give you the kingdom. And I've made the analogy here. I said, we need to start getting bad at maths. Because what happens is on Wednesdays, we go shopping, and Sonia does the shopping. I was about to say we love our gender roles. No, we don't. I do most of the girl stuff. There's no girl stuff or boy stuff. But Sonia does the shopping, and I take the boys to Smith's. And the boys are so bad at numbers, they're just like, oh, should we get that? What number is it? It says 99. Should we get it, Dad? And I'm like, no, we're not getting that. It's 99 pounds. Or they'll be like, oh, can we get a special treat? And they had their Christmas money, and they had £10 each, and they wanted to buy something. And again, they had no idea what £10 was. And Asher wanted the trampoline. I was like, the ones they have on the walls. I was like, not going to happen. And then he was like, oh, I can't get a trampoline. He kind of thought for a bit. He's like, can I get a sweet? And it's like a penny sweet. I'm like, yeah, you can get about 1,000 of those. So, but you know what? They walk through the shop, and they're just thinking, my dad's going to get something for me. They're not worried about how much it costs. They're not worried, and I have to say no sometimes, most of the time. They're not worried about how much it costs. They don't understand what's in their hand. All they know is that it's my pleasure to give them what they need. That it's actually a pleasure to me to give my children the things they need. And Jesus sympathizes us with so much. He says, don't be anxious. He sees us. He sees us struggling. He sees us worrying. He sees us looking at the cost of living and looking at our bank accounts, and he sees us worrying. And he's not here to berate us. He's not here to say, get over it. He's not here to say, do better. He says, fear not, little flock. It's my pleasure. It's his pleasure to provide for us. And actually, there's something amazing about giving God the pleasure of providing for us. And we've got to get into the habit of giving God the pleasure of providing for us. Of saying to God, I'm not going to worry about that because I know that you love providing for me. I'm not going to strive for that because I know that you love to provide for me. I'm not going to, kill myself and my family and my devotion to you. I'm not going to, get rid of everything else in my life just to make sure I can survive because I know that it's your pleasure to provide for me. And you think of yourself and your own children if you have them. We don't give them everything they want. And we don't give them everything they want, but we give them everything they need. And a bit more than that most of the time. And actually, that's God's fatherhood. He says, you may not get everything you want, but I will provide everything you need. And he says, fear not, little flock. And we've got to see ourselves like that little guy there. He's not worried about where the next grass is coming from. He's not worried about what the shepherd is going to say or do. He just thinks, I'm going to follow, I'm going to eat, God's going to provide for me. And so I want to close with a bit of a longer passage. This is from 1 Timothy. It's our final slide. And in 1 Timothy, Paul is speaking to what he calls the wealthy. And he says, don't set your hope on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything. Be rich in good works and store up treasure so you can take hold of what is truly life. And I just want you to notice, Paul's talking about money here, and he's talking about being generous, and he's talking about, those things. Notice that he doesn't mention an amount. He doesn't mention a percentage. He doesn't mention, anything like that, a rule. He says, actually, set your hope here, put your trust here, and be generous. And when it comes to thinking about money, about wealth, about possessions, God looks down on us and he says, your hope is in the wrong place. Your trust is in the wrong place. And actually, set your hope on something that's actually going to come through for you. Put your trust in something, in someone that can actually follow through for you. Because, as we said before, if we put our hope in money, if we trust the promises that money makes, they will fail us. We will be let down. It cannot solve our problems. We know that from experience. We know that from the Bible. And if we put our trust in money and in what makes us money, we will be let down. But God says to us, don't be uncertain. Set your hope on God who richly provides. And what does it mean to set your hope on God? It doesn't mean just to cross your fingers and to say, well, God will come through for me. It's actually that second part. It says to be rich in good works, to be rich toward God, to give. Jesus says, sell your possessions, give to the needy. Come follow me and I'll provide everything for you. So my challenge to you, the final thing I want to say is that Jesus gives us an amazing opportunity. An amazing opportunity. He's given us a heavy weight. Yeah, like one of them huge exercise balls that you have to carry like this. And we can feel the responsibility of that weight and that can stress us out. But if we put it down on the side of self, it will drag us down. And if we put it down on the side of God, it will drag us towards God. And actually, my plea to you as family members of this church, as Christians, is to say, trust God. That if you place your money and your hope and your trust in his hands, he will never let you down. He will always come through for you. And if you see yourself on this side, if you see yourself putting hope, trust, certainty in money and in riches and your bank account, God's not here to berate you. God's not here to tell you off. He's here to just gently tease your fingers off and say, there's actually something of infinite value over here you can have. There's actually something of infinite, there's actually a deeper hope and a deeper peace and a deeper security that you can have if you just let go. So I'm not here to say, bump your offering. I'm not here to say, sign up for a new Compassion Child. I would love you to do those things. But actually it's about look in your heart and say, where's my hope? Where's my trust? Where's my certainty? And if it's in the wrong things, how can I let go of those things practically? How can I tease my fingers off? How can I move my heart from one place to the other and closer to God in his kingdom? So I'm just gonna pray for us as we close. I guess I'll invite Usha back up. But Father, thank you that you are so sympathetic, God. I just thank you that you look at us and our genuine worries and our anxieties and the things that keep us up and the things that stress us out. And your word to us is, fear not, little flock. It is my pleasure to give you the kingdom. And Father, I pray that you would make that real to us in these coming days, weeks, months, years, God, that when anxiety hits and when worry hits and when stress hits, that we would say, this is God's chance to provide for me. This is God's chance to lift me. And God, I ask that for each of us, that you would really just shine a light on our hearts, shine a light on where maybe money does dominate us, where worries and riches and wealth just takes hold of us. And God, you would help us to move our hearts towards you. You'd help us to choose you as our master and not money, and to choose you as our Father and our provider and not ourselves.